let's start, however, with another issue that, aside from the ones I've mentioned in the introduction, the incident in Mountjoy tonight. Peter, you are familiar with conditions in Mountjoy. You're hardly surprised by an outbreak of some protest in Mountjoy.
Well, I'm not. I mean, Mountjoy at the moment is a hellhole. It is grossly overcrowded. The Inspector of Prisons has stated publicly that any more than 540 prisoners in Mountjoy Prison, and it is no longer safe either for staff or for prisoners. And recently there were 791 in Mountjoy Prison. It is one prison officer who's been working there now for over 20 years said to me recently that for the first time in his life he doesn't feel safe coming into work. The place is a total disaster. There is no policy to deal with it. The only policy is to keep doubling up, putting more and more bunk beds into cells. There are some cells you can hardly move in because there would be 3 bunk beds, 6 prisoners sharing a cell, hardly any floor space left. Whatever little humanity was in the system has been drained out of it. And that, although there are some wonderful prison officers who work there and doing their best, but they too are totally frustrated. It is overcrowded, it is drug-filled, and there is a huge amount of violence in it. There are so many feudings, factions going on. There are so many people who are afraid in prison. 1 in 4 prisoners is on 23-hour lockup for their own protection. That means they're in a cell 23 hours a day. If you had a dog in a cell that size 23 hours a day, you'd be reported to the ISPCA.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, we've been talking about this for I don't know how long, but of course Michael McDowell has proposed the building of a new prison out in Thornton Hall, and that's I don't know whether that's proceeding or not at present. Do you know?
The official line is that it is proceeding, and they're building a perimeter wall and they're building an access road, and the plan now is it was meant to be built and opened by 2012. The plan now is that it's going to be built on a phased basis, and that the first phase is the preparations for the first phase are underway. I suspect that's a face-saving exercise, actually, that in order not to be seen to do a U-turn, they're going to have to build some little small unit there which will house some prisoners, and then they will decide the money isn't available to complete the project yet, and put the rest of it on the back boiler.
There's no interest at all in conditions of prisons or the condition of prisoners at all in our society. And before going to somebody else, Peter, just to stay with you on this, one of the things called the corporal works of mercy. Remember those things? Mary Louise, remember the corporal works of mercy?
Yes, I was one of them. Yes, I do. Yeah.
What were they?
Well, they were kind of... as I remember them, they were kind of sacrifices people were.
Yeah, what were they? What were the corporal works of mercy? You don't know. You don't remember. You don't remember.
I haven't got a clue.
Well, one of them was visit the sick. Look after the sick and visit the imprisoned. And it was one of the things that was lauded in the Christian tradition, that Christians cared about looking after prisoners, and it's regarded as a joke nowadays.
But isn't it interesting that then a lot of it was because these people were poor? So there was that tradition of also visiting the poor, who ended up in prison far more than any other social group. And all the reports that nobody is paying attention to indicates that the population of Mountjoy are drawn from the poorest, least educated. So we really have made no progress at all. And from what you're saying, we seem to have lost our values as well. Meanwhile, if somebody was to ask us to point out 10 crooks using our camera phones or downloading a new app, would we pick them in Mountjoy or would we pick them outside Mountjoy?
We know also from the obscenity of the money that people who commit crimes in that area, they don't go to prison. They never go to prison. We don't see them in prison. I think the last person was Mr. Gallagher, but I think that he was tried in the north at the time for some area of money embezzlement or something at the time. We don't seem to send anybody up from the, as you say, the middle class or the upper middle classes or the ruling classes to jail. They just don't go to jail in Ireland.
Not quite true.
We send,
well, generally speaking, Vincent,
for instance, we send paedophile priests to jail.
That is true.
Yeah, and I
But I was talking about crimes of money, money and bankruptcy.
How many bankers have been jailed?
Well, how many bankers have been found guilty of a crime?
Well, none, as far as I can see.
So?
And where's the delay?
Well, I don't know.
What's a crime to some classes is inappropriate behaviour to others.
Yeah, and the hang them and flog them brigade become bleeding heart liberals when it comes to their own.
I think we make a distinction between crimes where there is a very clear identifiable victim, like a robbery or an assault, and crimes which are where the victim is more anonymous, or it affects a group of people, like white collar crime or tax evasion, and we don't treat those kind of crimes as seriously as we do those where there is a clear identifiable victim.
Of course, we should be looking at the root cause of all of this, because as we know, the more unequal a society is, the more likely there is greater, crime levels. There's greater kind of fear for safety. There's greater unrest, and so the obvious solution is you try and address inequality within society, and everybody benefits.
All the left-wing agenda.
I know, the bleeding heart liberals again.
But the interesting thing about Mountjoy as well, with what Father Peter was saying, that Michael McDowell, I think, paid the highest amount of money in the state per acre for the new prison, and it's still lying there, with nothing done with it, and as you say, with no, and that was done how many years ago?
It's quite a few years now, and the problem is that no real remedial work has been done in Mountjoy, because Thornton Hall was about to open, and now that Thornton Hall is on the very, very long finger, we have a disastrous prison in Mountjoy, totally unsuitable for the need, no sanitation.
Is there no sanitation?
Well, it's not true to say there's no sanitation. There's no in-cell sanitation.
There's no in-cell sanitation.
It's
in most of Mountjoy.
It's appalling that like 6 guys in a cell and no in-cell sanitation, and they're locked up there for how many hours? 12 hours. 12 hours.
Some nights there isn't even a mattress for some of the prisoners to sleep on.
Well, that's a recipe
they have to sleep on 2 chairs.
But a lot of people say, well, isn't it good enough for them? But they've committed terrible crimes. They often have assaulted old people, robbed them, frightened them out of their wits, maybe deprived them of their happiness at the end of their lives, and they bloody deserve it.
And there are some prisoners in Mountjoy who have committed horrific crimes, but they tend then to become the stereotype. No, the stereotype of what prison. There are many people in prison who are primarily there because of homelessness, who are primarily there because of mental health problems that have not been dealt with, who are there because they could not access addiction programs. There are many there who are not the very serious criminal that we tend to associate with prison.
And I remember being a youth worker in Limerick and watching young fellas who were 15 and 16 ending up in prison for minor offences and coming out of prison maybe a week later and being fundamentally changed, because the experience of even that 1 week would have changed them. It would have had such a negative impact on their lives that there was always really difficult to try and hold that person and make them feel that some sense of self-worth and self-esteem, because they would have been effectively broken. And I saw many of those people end up back in prison for much more severe sentences, and just started that life of kind of revolving door prison kind of
according to Brian O'Donovan's report on the 11 o'clock news there, 2 prison officers have been hurt, one of them by a billiard ball being thrown at them, or a snooker ball being thrown at them. That could do a lot of damage to somebody.
Certainly could. One of the ways they use is you put a couple of billiard balls into a sock, and then you use that as a weapon. Now, I don't know if that happened on this particular occasion, it probably didn't, but that is one of the ways in which prisoners get attacked. And in fact, the last prisoner who died in Mountjoy was attacked that way.
But in a Lord of the Flies situation, where you have, almost a third more people there than the recommended amount, the recommended maximum amount, and a lack of investment, inevitably you're going to create this appalling vista of savagery, of the worst of humanity, and all of that, which is going to make citizens outside feel much better. And with all the empty property lying around, I wonder why they can't adapt some of these buildings and areas and make them secure.
Father Peter, was the education unit closed too? Aspects of the education unit in Mountjoy? It used to have a great reputation at one stage, and it was full. But I think it lost money as well during this whole debacle.
There was a period when there were cutbacks affecting, but I think the education unit is still there, and I think it still does a very good job. But when you have such great numbers, then only a limited number have access to the education unit, and then only for limited period of times. I would appeal to every district court judge in the country to go and visit Mountjoy. District court judges are sending people to jail, and they're coming out worse than they went in. I have been told by at least...
If the district justices went in for a week there, would they come out worse?
Well, even go in and see it. Get a guided tour by somebody who knows.
They should go in for
a week.
I've been told, good idea.
I've been told by at least 40 to 50 young people that they went into prison not knowing what a drug looked like, and they came out addicted to heroin. At least 40, if not 50 young people have told me that, and I believe them. They've told me independently. They're not putting it on. I think just it's a total disaster.